It was New Year's Day, 2015, in the quiet town of St. Joseph, Michigan, a day brimming with the promise of fresh beginnings. Christina Bond, a 55-year-old mother of two and a newly elected Republican precinct delegate, was at home. A Navy veteran, a fitness champion, and a pillar of her community, Christina had built a life defined by strength, resilience, and service. But in a cruel twist of fate, her determination to protect herself would lead to an unthinkable tragedy. That morning, Christina was adjusting a new accessory, a bra holster designed to provide a discreet way for women to carry firearms. It seemed like the perfect solution, practical, inconspicuous, and empowering. But as Christina fiddled with the holster, trying to get it to fit just right, something went terribly wrong. With her gaze fixed downward, Christina shifted the firearm within the holster. The details are chillingly simple: a moment of frustration, a small adjustment, and then a deafening crack that shattered the stillness of the day. The gun discharged, and the bullet struck her directly in the eye. Neighbors later described hearing a commotion, but couldn't have imagined the horror unfolding inside Christina's home. First responders rushed to the scene, finding Christina gravely injured. She was airlifted to Bronson Methodist Hospital in Kalamazoo, clinging to life. For hours, doctors fought desperately to save her, but by the following day, Christina was gone. Her death sent shockwaves through the community. How could a woman so strong, so capable, lose her life in such a devastating and unexpected way? Christina was more than just a mother and community leader. She was a beacon of faith and resilience. At her church, where she ministered for 15 years, and at the local jail, where she counseled inmates, she was known for her unwavering kindness and strength. Her son, Nicholas, in a heart-wrenching tribute, described her as God's most powerful soldier on earth. She was a woman who had conquered challenges that would have broken others. 2 years in the Navy, a championship in bodybuilding, and countless acts of service to her community. And yet, in the simplest of moments, while adjusting a holster designed to keep her safe, her life was tragically cut short. Christina's story raises haunting questions about firearm safety and the risks posed by certain accessories like bra holsters. Experts later speculated that the gun discharged because it either slipped from its clamshell or her finger inadvertently triggered it during adjustment. Whatever the cause, the tragedy is a sobering reminder of the potential dangers lurking in everyday decisions. Her death left behind a void that words can hardly capture. A mother lost to her children, a friend gone too soon, and a community forever changed. As Nicholas wrote in his heartfelt tribute, "It's in her strength that I've found my own." But now, that strength feels so far away. Christina's legacy as a woman of faith, resilience, and determination endures, but her death stands as a powerful and painful cautionary tale, a reminder that even in moments of control, life can take an unexpected and devastating turn. September 23, 2017. The air was crisp in the Welsh countryside, and Elizabeth Isherwood, a 60-year-old former police officer, arrived at the Plas Talgarth holiday complex near Machynlleth, Wales, ready for a peaceful retreat. This trip wasn't just a vacation, it was a final farewell to the family timeshare her loved ones had recently sold. But what was meant to be a quiet week of reflection and relaxation turned into a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. Elizabeth would never make it back home. Elizabeth, known as Mary to those closest to her, was vibrant, fit, and full of life. A grandmother who adored her grandchildren, she was the type of person who had seen the world, embraced its challenges, and met them head-on. From her days as a police officer to her more recent work as a carer, she thrived in helping others. But on her first night at Plas Talgarth, fate trapped her in a horrifying struggle for survival. Sometime in the middle of the night, Elizabeth rose from her bed, disoriented in the unfamiliar surroundings. She mistakenly opened the door to the airing cupboard instead of the ensuite bathroom. A faulty door handle snapped behind her, locking her in the small, suffocating space. Clad only in her skin, she was now a prisoner in a dark, narrow cupboard, isolated from the world. Panic set in. Elizabeth fought with every ounce of her strength, Hours passed as she clawed at the walls, desperate for an escape. She broke a pipe in her frantic struggle, hoping to use it as a tool to break free. Instead, water sprayed relentlessly, drenching her and hastening the onset of hypothermia. Her body trembled as the cold seeped into her bones, but she refused to give up. With sheer determination, Elizabeth managed to punch through the plasterboard wall. Relief must have surged through her as she saw daylight, only to find that the hole she created was blocked by a picture frame screwed to the wall on the other side. Her cries for help echoed through the building, muffled and misunderstood. A couple staying nearby heard the banging, but dismissed it as maintenance work. Their decision to wait until morning to report it sealed Elizabeth's fate. By 5 p.m. the following day, all went silent. The banging stopped, the cries faded, and Elizabeth's fight came to a heartbreaking end. She succumbed to hypothermia, her exhausted body unable to endure the brutal cold any longer. It wasn't until a week later, on the day Elizabeth was supposed to check out, that staff discovered her lifeless body. She had never even unpacked her suitcase. The scene told the story of her final moments, a tale of resilience and unimaginable suffering. For her son, Craig, and her ex-husband, Clive, the news was shattering. Craig, faced with the impossible task of explaining the tragedy to Elizabeth's beloved grandchildren, described it as the hardest conversation of his life. The family was not only grief-stricken but angry. How could a faulty door handle and a lack of proper maintenance lead to such a horrific death? The inquest ruled Elizabeth's death a misadventure, but to her loved ones, it was a preventable tragedy. Craig took legal action against the resort, not for financial gain but to ensure no other family would endure such heartache. The fight wasn't just for justice, it was for Elizabeth's legacy, a woman who deserved so much more than to be forgotten as a casualty of negligence. Elizabeth's story is a stark reminder of how quickly the ordinary can turn deadly, how a single moment of oversight can spiral into a devastating loss. It urges us to demand better safety measures, to advocate for accountability, and to honor those who, like Elizabeth, fought with every breath to survive against impossible odds. February 25, 2010, started like any other day in Invercargill, a quiet town on New Zealand's South Island, until Christopher Hodgkinson found his partner of 15 years, Natasha Harris, slumped against the bathroom wall, struggling to breathe. Her breaths were shallow and labored, and despite frantic attempts to save her, Natasha passed away from cardiac arrest. She was just 30 years old. Her sudden death left behind 8 young children and a devastated partner. But what made her passing even more shocking was the culprit behind it. Not drugs, not alcohol, but Coca-Cola. Natasha's Coke addiction had started in her teenage years, but over time, it spiraled out of control. By the time of her death, she was drinking 10 liters of Coke every single day. That's about 18 pints, more than 11 times the recommended daily sugar intake and twice the safe limit for caffeine. Her day started with Coke and ended with Coke, and if she didn't have it, she'd go into full withdrawal mode, shaking, irritable, and agitated. Her mother-in-law, Vivian Hodgkinson, recalled how Natasha would become extremely distressed if there wasn't Coke in the house. It was more than just a craving. It had become an addiction. For years, Natasha dealt with a laundry list of health issues: fatigue, nausea, heart palpitations, and vomiting multiple times a week. She was constantly exhausted, but no one, including her, linked her symptoms to her ridiculous soda intake. Her teeth completely decayed, so much so that they had to be removed. One of her children was even born without tooth enamel, something doctors linked to her high soda consumption during pregnancy. But the real damage was happening inside. An autopsy later revealed that her liver was swollen with fatty deposits from excessive sugar intake. She also suffered from hypokalemia, dangerously low potassium levels that can lead to serious heart issues. Pathologist Dr. Dan Mornan explained that symptoms like muscle weakness, fatigue, and vomiting, which Natasha frequently experienced, were classic signs of this condition. On top of that, the insane amount of caffeine in her system was making her heartbeat dangerously irregular. On the day she died, Natasha hadn't shown any alarming signs of illness, just complained about feeling unwell. Hours later, Christopher found her unresponsive in the bathroom. He called for help, but by the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. The inquest into her death revealed just how catastrophic her coke addiction had been. Coroner David Crerar ruled that her excessive soda intake was a major factor in her cardiac arrest. He stated bluntly that her death was unlikely to have happened when it did, and how it did without her extreme soda consumption. The toxic combo of sugar and caffeine had thrown her body's metabolism into chaos, leading to fatal consequences. The case sparked a heated debate. Coca-Cola Oceania was not thrilled with the findings, arguing that there was no definitive proof linking their product to Natasha's heart attack. They also insisted they couldn't control how much Coke people chose to drink. In response, the coroner made several recommendations, including caffeine labels on sodas and warning messages about excessive consumption. He also urged New Zealand's Ministry of Health to consider stricter regulations on caffeinated drinks. But not everyone believed warning labels would have made a difference. Catherine Rich from the New Zealand Food and Grocery Council pointed out that Natasha was also a heavy smoker and ignored medical advice for other health issues, suggesting that her lifestyle as a whole played a role in her death. Despite everything, Natasha's family remembered her as a loving mother who put her kids before anything else. She skipped meals to make sure they had enough food and spent weeks planning their birthdays to make them special. But life hadn't been easy for her. Her coke addiction became her escape, much like how others might turn to alcohol or drugs. It was her way of coping with feeling trapped and overwhelmed. After her death, Christopher struggled to care for their children, who were eventually placed in state care. He also faced financial and legal troubles, making an already devastating situation even worse. Natasha's story is a chilling warning about the dangers of unchecked habits. No one thinks a simple soft drink could be deadly, but her case proved just how extreme the effects can be. Her family hopes her tragic death will raise awareness about the risks of excessive soda consumption and the broader struggles of addiction. It was a calm Sunday morning in 2009 in Alicante, Spain. The streets of Avenida Alcoy were quiet, the kind of serene stillness that belied the horrors about to unfold. Inside a cramped, modest apartment lived a family of four, a Moroccan couple in their late 40s and their two daughters, aged 18 and 12. Their life appeared ordinary on the surface, with the parents making a living by collecting and selling secondhand clothes. But behind closed doors, their reality was anything but ordinary. For years, the parents had struggled with a compulsive hoarding disorder known as Diogenes syndrome. Their apartment, less than 60 square meters, had become a labyrinth of towering boxes and suffocating piles of clothes. The hoarded items were a mix of their livelihood and their compulsion, gradually overtaking every corner of their home. Yet, life carried on. The older daughter spent late nights browsing the internet, often sleeping well into the mornings, while her younger sister and parents endured the claustrophobic environment. That Sunday morning, sometime between 8 and 9 a.m., catastrophe struck. Without warning, the weight of the hoarded clothes proved too much for the floor to bear. A deafening crash echoed through the apartment as the first floor gave way, sending an avalanche of clothes, boxes, and debris crashing down. Beneath the suffocating mass lay the parents and their 12-year-old daughter, buried alive. And yet, disturbingly, the tragedy unfolded in silence. The older daughter, sleeping in a nearby room, heard nothing. Neighbors, too, reported no sounds of the disaster. It wasn't until hours later, around 1 p.m., that the older daughter woke up. Groggy and disoriented, she sensed something was wrong. The eerie stillness in the apartment gnawed at her, and as she ventured into her parents' room, a chilling sight stopped her cold. The floor had caved in, leaving behind a chaotic sea of clothes and debris. Panicking, she began to dig through the wreckage, calling out for her family. Her heart sank when her fingers brushed against something cold, her younger sister's lifeless arm, jutting out from the pile. Frantic, she dialed emergency services, her voice trembling with terror. Rescue teams arrived quickly, but the sheer scale of the disaster was overwhelming. Firefighters and police struggled to navigate the mountains of clothing. The air grew heavy with the grim reality of their task. Hours passed, every second stretching into an agonizing eternity as they worked tirelessly to uncover the victims. The first body they found was the 12-year-old girl. Hope dwindled as paramedics confirmed what they feared. She hadn't survived. Still, the rescue efforts continued, driven by the desperate hope of saving the parents. But by the end of the day, the remaining bodies were found, lifeless beneath the crushing weight of their own hoard. As investigators surveyed the wreckage, the chilling truth emerged. Years of unchecked hoarding had transformed the apartment into a death trap. The sheer weight of the items had caused the floor to collapse, and the victims had likely suffocated or been crushed under the immense pressure. The surviving daughter was left utterly alone, her family taken in the most horrifying way imaginable. The tragedy was a harrowing reminder of the dangers of hoarding, particularly in confined spaces. Diogenes syndrome, often dismissed as eccentricity, had led to unimaginable devastation. This incident didn't just claim lives, it shattered the illusion of normalcy. It highlighted how compulsive behaviors, left unchecked, can spiral into catastrophe. As the surviving daughter grappled with her loss, the world was left to reckon with the haunting reality of what had happened on that quiet Sunday morning. A home filled with promise had become a tomb of despair. It was January 27, 2018, a day that began like any other at Nair Hospital in Mumbai but would soon descend into tragedy. Rajesh Maru, a 32-year-old man from Lalbagh, walked into the hospital not knowing he was taking his final steps. A devoted son, a caring friend, and a man known for his helpful nature, Rajesh was there to assist his brother-in-law's ailing mother, Lakshmibai Solanki, who urgently needed an MRI scan. The hospital's hallways buzzed with routine activity as Rajesh, alongside his brother-in-law Harish, wheeled Lakshmibai towards the MRI section. There, a staff member issued a familiar warning: no metal objects beyond this point. The powerful magnetic field of an MRI machine could turn even the smallest metallic item into a deadly projectile. Rajesh, cautious by nature, removed all metal from his person. But then came a fateful request. A ward boy, Vithal Shavan, handed Rajesh an oxygen cylinder and instructed him to bring it inside the MRI room. Rajesh hesitated, his instincts screaming against it. "Is the machine turned off?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. The ward boy waved off his fears, replying with an air of confidence, "This is our daily work, don't worry." Trusting the hospital staff, Rajesh stepped into the MRI room with the cylinder in hand. Within seconds, his life spiraled into a nightmare. The MRI machine, still operational, roared to life as its magnetic field grabbed the metal cylinder with ferocious force. Rajesh was yanked forward as if by an invisible hand, his body slamming into the machine. His hand, still clutching the cylinder, became trapped between the machine and the massive object. In the chaos, the cylinder's flow meter shattered, releasing liquid oxygen that sprayed onto Rajesh's face and into the room. The scene was pandemonium. Harish and the ward boy rushed to free Rajesh, but the magnetic pull was unrelenting. In the struggle, Rajesh's left index finger was severed. Panic turned to horror as Rajesh gasped for air, the excessive inhalation of oxygen suffocating him rather than saving him. Rajesh was rushed to the trauma center, but it was too late. By the time he reached the emergency ward, he was gone. The hospital fell into stunned silence as news of Rajesh's death spread. His father, Gulab Maru, arrived, his face etched with grief and disbelief. "How could this happen? How could such negligence take my son's life?" he cried, his voice breaking under the weight of his loss. The MRI room, now a crime scene, revealed the grim reality of a system that had failed catastrophically. Police quickly arrested Dr. Siddhant Andhera, ward boy Vital Shavan, and another staff member, Sunita Survey, charged them with causing death by negligence under Section 304A of the Indian Penal Code. An internal investigation was launched, and representatives from Philips, the MRI machine manufacturer, were called in to inspect the site. As the Maru family prepared to cremate Rajesh, their grief was compounded. Laxmibai, the very person Rajesh had died trying to help, succumbed to her illness days later. But even in death, Rajesh's ordeal wasn't over. His severed finger, a crucial part of Hindu last rites, remained trapped in the MRI machine for days. When it was finally removed, it was sent to a forensic laboratory, where it would remain for 18 months. For the family, the wait was an agonizing reminder of their loss. They made countless trips to the hospital and police station, fighting bureaucracy to retrieve the finger. Only on June 20th, 2019, were they able to claim it and perform Rajesh's final rites. Standing by the waters at Worli, they scattered his ashes, hoping to find a sliver of peace amid the torment. The tragedy sparked outrage across Mumbai. How could a hospital, a place of healing, become the site of such a horrifying death? Negligence and lax safety protocols had cost Rajesh his life, and his family was left not only grieving but battling for justice. Local politicians promised compensation, but the Maru family alleged that even those promises went unfulfilled. "This wasn't just an accident," said a devastated Harish. "It was a preventable tragedy, one caused by carelessness and indifference." Rajesh Maru's death stands as a chilling reminder of the catastrophic consequences of negligence. His story is not just one of loss, but of the urgent need for accountability, safety, and respect for human life. April 4th, 2019, was just another regular day for Darren Hickey, a 51-year-old wedding venue manager in Chorley, Lancashire. He ran Ridgemont House with pride, making sure every event went off without a hitch. But Darren wasn't just about business. He was a walking, talking example of resilience. 7 years earlier, he had survived a massive stroke that put him in the hospital for a whopping 18 months. Most people would have slowed down after that, but not Darren. He threw himself into charity work, using his experience to help others, and even won the Stroke Association's Inspirational Person of Courage Award. He was the kind of guy who didn't let life knock him down for long. But unfortunately, fate had one more cruel twist in store. That afternoon, as Darren was wrapping up work, a chef asked him to taste a fish cake for an upcoming event. Simple enough, right? What could possibly go wrong with a tiny bite of food? Well, everything. The fish cake was molten lava hot, and as Darren swallowed, it burned his throat. He winced, but shrugged it off. After all, how bad could it really be? He didn't know it yet, but this seemingly minor burn was far more dangerous than anyone could have guessed. Hours later, his throat started feeling tight and uncomfortable. The pain was getting worse, and something felt off. When he told his partner, Neil Parkinson, about it, Neil didn't like the sound of it one bit and urged him to get checked out. So, Darren went to Chorley Hospital's urgent care ward, expecting a quick checkup and maybe some medication. At the hospital, Darren explained the burning sensation and difficulty swallowing. A healthcare professional examined him, even consulting an ENT specialist from Preston Hospital. But here's the catch. The burn was too deep in his throat to be seen without special equipment. With no visible signs of injury in his mouth or tongue, doctors assumed it wasn't that serious. They handed him some paracetamol, told him to go home, and advised him to come back if things got worse. What no one realized was that Darren was already on borrowed time. Unlike regular burns that blister immediately, throat burns swell up slowly, meaning symptoms can go from, "Hey, it's fine," to, "Oh no, I can't breathe," in a matter of hours. That night, Darren tried to rest, but his condition was deteriorating fast. Around 9:45 p.m., Neil heard some strange, choking noises coming from the other room. Rushing to check, he found Darren gasping for air, struggling to breathe. Panic set in as Neil tried to help, but things escalated too quickly. Darren collapsed right in front of him. In a desperate attempt to save him, Neil called 999, but a delay in locating their address added precious lost minutes to the response time. By the time paramedics arrived, Darren's airway was completely blocked. He was rushed to Royal Bolton Hospital, but there was nothing more that could be done. Less than 12 hours after eating that fish cake, Darren was gone. At the Bolton Coroner's Court inquest, acting senior coroner Alan Walsh called the case a rare and devastating tragedy. Dr. Patrick W., the pathologist who performed Darren's post-mortem, explained just how unusual and dangerous throat burns can be. They're typically seen in fire inhalation victims or industrial accidents, not from a simple bite of food. The symptoms don't seem urgent at first, which makes them incredibly hard to diagnose and treat. The coroner also raised concerns about Darren's care at Chorley Hospital, wondering whether more advanced diagnostic tools could have caught the issue earlier. Representatives from GTD Healthcare and NHS, Greater Preston Clinical Commissioning Group, promised to review the incident to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Darren's sudden passing was a massive shock to his friends, family, and the community. He wasn't just a survivor, he was a fighter, an inspiration, and someone who made the world a little better just by being in it. His charity work and unshakable positivity touched countless lives, making his loss even harder to accept. It was a bitterly cold evening in 2015 in the quiet township of Stony Creek, Pennsylvania, the kind of night when every creak and groan of the old houses seemed amplified. Inside one such home, 68-year-old James Schaffer sat alone, as he had for the past 25 years. Blind since birth, James was known for his resilience and independence, qualities that endeared him to his neighbors. But tonight, something ominous lurked within the walls of his modest home, a danger James couldn't see coming. That night, James felt a sharp ache in his leg, a familiar discomfort he often eased with warmth. Unaware of the peril that lay ahead, he reached for a dry towel and placed it in the microwave to warm. It was a simple act, one he'd done before without incident, but this time was different. Just 15 seconds after the microwave hummed to life, the towel erupted into flames. Oblivious to the fire's growing fury, James opened the microwave. The moment the scorching air met his face, he realized too late the peril he was in. The burning towel fell against him, setting his flannel shirt ablaze. The flames licked hungrily at the fabric, spreading faster than he could react. Blinded by both the inferno and his disability, James fought through the chaos, his instincts guiding him down the hall toward the bathroom. Flames leaped from his shirt to the carpet as he moved, leaving a smoldering trail in his wake. The air was thick with acrid smoke, and every breath seared his lungs. Reaching the bathroom, James managed to activate the shower, drenching himself to extinguish the fire. When the Oakland Fire Department arrived, they found a scene that shook even the most seasoned responders. James stood in the bathroom, his body burned over 80%, his clothes reduced to charred remnants. And yet, he was calm, unnervingly so. Deputy Chief David Ream would later recall the haunting image of James, his voice steady despite his agony. "I'm sorry," James said repeatedly, his words thick with remorse. "I should have known better." His apology, delivered between shallow, labored breaths, stunned the first responders. How could a man endure such excruciating pain with such composure? James was rushed to a hospital in Pittsburgh where paramedics marveled at his strength even as his condition deteriorated. His burns were extensive, and his lungs had suffered irreparable damage from inhaling the searing fumes. Despite the medical team's desperate efforts, James succumbed to his injuries the next morning. The official cause of death, thermal inhalation. The community of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, was devastated. James had been more than a neighbor. He was a symbol of perseverance, a man who, despite his blindness, had built a life of quiet dignity. His neighbors remembered him as one of the kindest and most intelligent men they had ever met, a figure of strength who never let his disability define him. For the Oakland Fire Department, this was the township's first fire-related death in decades. The tragedy weighed heavily on them. "He was so calm," Ream said, struggling to reconcile James's composure with the grim reality of his fate. The story of James Schaffer is a haunting reminder of life's fragility. It raises painful questions that linger in the minds of those who knew him. What if he had known the dangers of microwaving a dry towel? What if someone had been there to help? What if there had been tools better suited for someone like James? devices to keep him safe in moments of vulnerability? Though these questions remain unanswered, James's death underscores the critical need for safety awareness and innovative solutions to support those with disabilities. It's a stark lesson about the dangers that can lurk in even the most mundane tasks. In the end, James Schaffer's life and death stand as a testament to human resilience and the unpredictability of fate. His story reminds us not just of the need for vigilance, but of the strength that can shine even in our darkest moments. It was a quiet, unassuming night in Caratinga, a small town nestled in southeastern Brazil. Life here was simple, almost uneventful, and for João Maria de Souza, a 45-year-old man, this night seemed no different. He lay soundly asleep beside his wife, Lenny, in their modest home at the base of a steep hill. But destiny, it seemed, had other plans. The date was July 2013, and as the couple slumbered peacefully, an unusual chain of events unfolded just beyond their knowledge. A massive, one-ton cow had escaped from a nearby farm. It wandered aimlessly under the cover of darkness, its heavy steps muffled by the quiet of the town. Drawn inexplicably to their property, the animal climbed onto the roof of João's house, a roof made of fragile corrugated iron, never meant to support such weight. The silence of the night shattered in an instant. With a deafening crash, the roof gave way, and the enormous cow plummeted into their bedroom. Chaos erupted as João's side of the bed bore the brunt of the impact. Lenny woke to a nightmare, a massive animal thrashing amidst the ruins of their ceiling, her husband pinned beneath its bulk. Miraculously, Lenny emerged unscathed, and even the cow survived the bizarre fall without injury. João, however, lay trapped, groaning in pain but conscious. The scene was surreal. Debris littered the floor, and João's breaths came in short, strained gasps. Emergency services arrived swiftly, extracting João from the wreckage. Though in immense pain, he remained lucid as he was rushed to the hospital. A fractured leg appeared to be the extent of his injuries. A stroke of fortune, considering the absurdity of the accident. His family clung to hope, believing the worst was behind them. But fate had one more cruel twist to deliver. At the hospital, João's condition began to deteriorate unexpectedly. What seemed at first to be a survivable ordeal spiraled into a medical tragedy. Hours ticked by as João awaited proper examination, his family growing increasingly desperate. Internal bleeding worsened, and their hope turned to anguish. By the time doctors finally attended to him, it was too late. João succumbed to his injuries, leaving his loved ones devastated and enraged. Being crushed by a cow in your own bed, that's no way for anyone to go, his grieving brother-in-law lamented to the press. His mother, inconsolable, spoke of the bitter irony. I fought to save him when he was a child, only for him to die like this. It's unbearable. The local police launched an investigation, determined to uncover the answers to a cascade of questions. Who owned the cow? How did it escape? And most haunting of all, could this tragedy have been avoided? Photos of the aftermath, a gaping hole in the roof, João's grieving family standing beside his coffin, painted a harrowing picture of a life cut short in the most bizarre of circumstances. For João's family, the bizarre accident was compounded by their fury at the healthcare system's delays. To them, it wasn't just the cow that claimed João's life, it was negligence, both human and systemic. In this quiet town, what began as an ordinary night ended in a tragedy so strange and cruel that it defied belief, leaving behind echoes of grief, anger, and unanswered questions. October 10th, 2014, seemed like any other day for 75-year-old Vera Williams in Rhyl, Wales. She sat down for breakfast, likely expecting a peaceful morning with her tea and toast, but a sharp fragment of toast had other plans. It lodged itself in her throat, causing discomfort. It was annoying, sure, but life-threatening. It didn't seem that way. However, Vera, who had a history of severe heart disease, decided to get checked out, just in case. She headed to Isbiti Glan Cled's A&E, where junior doctor Noor Ismail examined her. Seeing no immediate signs of serious illness, The doctor sent her home without further tests. No major concerns. Just a scratchy throat that would likely heal on its own. Or so everyone thought. For the next 2 weeks, the discomfort persisted, but Vera didn't immediately seek further medical attention. Then, on October 23rd, unable to ignore the pain any longer, she returned to the hospital. This time, she was seen by Dr. Adedeji Adeleke. She mentioned neck pain but didn't explain that it had been bothering her since her initial visit. Without that key piece of information, Dr. Adeleke suspected a simple throat infection, prescribed antibiotics, and discharged her. Unfortunately, the real issue remained undiagnosed. The very next day, October 24th, Vera's condition took a terrifying turn. She started coughing up blood and was rushed back to the hospital. This time, doctors weren't taking any chances. They conducted a thorough examination, including a CT scan, which finally revealed the shocking truth. The sharp toast fragment had torn her esophagus, causing a rare and serious condition called esophageal perforation. This kind of injury is extremely rare, occurring in only 3 cases per million people. But in Vera's case, it had led to internal bleeding, with blood leaking into her intestines, explaining her worsening symptoms. At this point, her doctors were faced with a brutal dilemma. The best treatment for an esophageal tear is surgery, but because of Vera's severe heart disease, surgery was simply too risky. With limited options, her medical team focused on managing her condition as best they could. But despite their efforts, her health rapidly declined, and just a few days later, Vera passed away. Her death led to an inquest to determine if earlier detection could have changed the outcome. The investigation found that the doctors had acted appropriately based on the information available at the time. Dr. Marion Hughes, a senior emergency medicine consultant, reviewed the case and explained that esophageal tears are so rare that most doctors wouldn't even suspect them unless there were clear warning signs. Even she, with 40 years of experience, had never encountered a case like this. However, the inquest also exposed some systemic flaws. At the time, the hospital still relied on paper records, making it difficult for doctors to track a patient's history across multiple visits. Coroner Nicola Jones suggested that if the hospital had used electronic records, Dr. Adeleke might have been aware of Vera's previous visit and possibly considered a more serious condition. But even if the issue had been caught sooner, her pre-existing heart condition meant that her treatment options were always going to be limited. Vera's story is a tragic reminder of how a seemingly minor incident, like eating breakfast, can spiral into something far worse. It also highlights the importance of clear communication between patients and doctors, and the need for better hospital systems to ensure that no crucial details slip through the cracks. It was a bright August day in 2012, the kind where the sunshine feels endless and the world seems full of promise. In the quiet town of Hoarding, Quebec, Maria Pantazopoulos, a vibrant 30-year-old real estate agent, was brimming with excitement. She was set to take part in a Trash the Dress photo shoot, a trend that had become a symbol of daring fun, where brides wear their wedding dresses in unconventional settings for unique and unforgettable photos. For Maria, this was more than just a shoot. It was a celebration of her joyful new chapter, after marrying the love of her life just months earlier. Maria had every reason to smile that day. She had recently returned from a dreamy Caribbean honeymoon and was thriving in her new job in Laval. Her optimism and zest for life were infectious, her laughter a constant companion to those who knew her. She told friends, "I want to make my wedding dress unforgettable, not something that just gathers dust." But no one could have imagined the haunting twist fate had planned. The chosen location was the picturesque Waro River, nestled about 75 kilometers from Montreal. As Maria stepped into her pristine wedding dress, her photographer, Louis Pagakis, prepared to capture the magic. The scene was idyllic. The calm river glistening under the summer sun, the air filled with anticipation. Maria waded into the shallow water, the hem of her dress grazing the surface as she playfully splashed. She was radiant, completely in the moment. But as the shoot progressed, Maria ventured further into the river. Her dress, designed for beauty rather than practicality, began to absorb water like a sponge. It grew heavier with every step, transforming into a leaden weight. Yet Maria, determined to capture the perfect shot, kept going, her excitement masking the brewing danger. The mood shifted in an instant. The dress, now fully waterlogged, clung to her with a suffocating force. What had been a symbol of joy and freedom became an anchor, pulling her down into the river's depths. Panic set in as Maria realized she couldn't fight the weight dragging her under. Louis rushed to her side, shouting for help, his hands desperately trying to lift her, but the gown refused to let go. Maria's voice, once so full of life, broke through the chaos with chilling finality. "I can't anymore. It's too heavy." Then, silence. For hours, rescuers searched frantically, but the current and the unrelenting weight of the dress had claimed her. By 4:30 p.m., her lifeless body was recovered, leaving behind a community shattered by grief. Family and friends, who knew Maria as a beacon of kindness and strength, were left to grapple with the unthinkable. A vibrant life stolen in a moment meant for celebration. Maria's tragic story is a stark reminder of how joy can so suddenly turn to sorrow. Her memory serves as a warning of the unforeseen dangers that can lurk in even the most beautiful moments. For those who loved her, the heartbreak remains, a painful echo of a day that should have been filled with nothing but light. On the morning of September 24, 1980, John Bonham, the legendary drummer of Led Zeppelin, woke up to what should have been a day of excitement. The band was gearing up for their first tour in 3 years, a chance to reignite their dominance over the rock world. Yet beneath the anticipation lay the storm of Bonham's struggles, a storm that would lead to one of the darkest days in music history. Bonham, affectionately known as Bonzo, was no stranger to excess. His larger-than-life personality extended far beyond his unparalleled drumming. That morning, as Led Zeppelin's assistant Rex King picked him up, the tone for the day was set. At breakfast, Bonham knocked back 4 powerful vodkas before the first rehearsal note had even been played. The band convened at guitarist Jimmy Page's home in Bray, England, a tranquil village that masked the turmoil brewing within Bonham. The day unfolded with rehearsals, laughter, and camaraderie, but Bonham's drinking escalated. Each hour brought another glass, and each glass brought him closer to the edge. By evening, his movements were unsteady, his speech slurred, a shadow of the man who commanded drum kits with thunderous precision. As the day waned, concern grew among his bandmates. They were used to Bonham's indulgences, but this was different. When the night ended, they made the fateful decision to put him to bed in one of Page's spare rooms, carefully laying him on his side to prevent the worst from happening. It was a precaution born of experience, but this time, it wouldn't be enough. Morning came, September 25th, 1980. The house was still and eerily quiet. At 1:45 p.m., Led Zeppelin's road manager Ben Lefebvre went to check on Bonham. He knocked, called out, and finally pushed open the door. What he found would haunt him forever. Bonham lay motionless, his face pale, his body unnaturally still. Lefebvre tried to rouse him, shaking him gently at first, then frantically. Desperation set in as he searched for a pulse, but there was none. Panic swept over him as he called for help, but when the ambulance arrived, it was already too late. At just 32 years old, John Bonham, the heartbeat of Led Zeppelin, was gone. The cause of death was grimly fitting for the lifestyle he led: pulmonary aspiration. Bonham had choked on his own vomit, a result of consuming an almost unimaginable amount of alcohol, equivalent to 40 shots of vodka over 12 hours. According to Dr. Edmund Hempstead, Bonham's body had gone into shock, his liver overwhelmed by the relentless tide of toxins. Death hadn't come swiftly. It had stalked him for hours, quietly and inexorably. The news sent shockwaves through the music world. Bonham wasn't just a drummer, he was a force of nature. His innovative, thunderous style had redefined what rock drumming could be, leaving an indelible mark on countless musicians. His death didn't just end a life, it fractured a band that had come to symbolize an era. In the weeks that followed, the remaining members of Led Zeppelin wrestled with an impossible question. Could they go on without him? By December 4, 1980, their answer was clear. In a simple, heart-wrenching statement, they announced the band's dissolution, citing their profound respect for Bonham's memory and the bond that could never be replaced. Fans mourned not only Bonham, but the end of Led Zeppelin, a band that had ruled the 1970s with an iron grip on the rock world. In the years that followed, brief reunions teased what might have been, most notably at the 2007 O2 Arena show immortalized in Celebration Day. But Led Zeppelin, as it once was, would never return. The loss of John Bonham remains one of rock's great tragedies. His drumming, immortalized in songs like Kashmir and When the Levee Breaks, continues to inspire, a testament to his unmatched genius. Yet his death raises questions that linger to this day. What if he had drunk less? Could his bandmates have done more to intervene? Would Led Zeppelin have soared higher, rewriting rock history? We will never know. What remains is the legacy of a drummer who gave everything to his craft and paid the ultimate price. John Bonham's life was as intense and electrifying as the music he created, and his death stands as a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk behind the glimmering facade of rock stardom. On July 14, 2024, Pan Xiaoting, a 24-year-old popular live streamer, sat in front of her camera, ready for another one of her legendary mukbang sessions. Mukbang, a South Korean-born trend, involves eating massive amounts of food while chatting with an audience. It had made Pan an internet star, with thousands of viewers tuning in. On this day, her ambitious feast, a staggering 10 kilograms of food, including seafood, chicken fingers, and chocolate cake, would be her last. Pan's journey into mukbang started in her early 20s when she was working as a waitress. She noticed how much people loved watching others eat online and decided to jump on the trend, and it worked big time. She quickly gained a massive following, pulling in views, money, and gifts from fans who couldn't get enough of her jaw-dropping food challenges. Some of her streams lasted up to 10 hours, as she devoured plate after plate while engaging with her enthusiastic audience. But the darker side of this extreme lifestyle soon caught up with her. Pan had already been hospitalized for gastric bleeding, a clear warning sign that her body was struggling. Her parents begged her to stop, but she assured them she could handle it. By July 2024, however, she weighed around 300 kilograms and was morbidly obese, yet she kept pushing her limits for the sake of content. On that fateful day, Pan started her mega feast as usual. First, chocolate cake, then crispy chicken fingers, followed by a mountain of seafood. Her audience was divided. Some cheered her on, while others worried about her health. As the hours passed, things took a turn for the worse. Suddenly, in the middle of her stream, she collapsed. Shocked viewers watched helplessly, frantically trying to alert emergency services, but it was too late. The stream continued briefly before the platform shut it down. The news of her tragic death spread quickly, leaving fans devastated. An autopsy later confirmed what many had feared. Her stomach had ruptured. Overwhelmed by the sheer amount of undigested food, the rupture allowed stomach acid and food particles to leak into her abdomen, leading to fatal complications. Her body had simply given up under the extreme strain. Pan's sudden death sparked a wave of concern and outrage. Mukbang had started as a way to combat loneliness, letting viewers share a meal with their favorite streamers. But over time, it had evolved into a dangerous spectacle, rewarding those who could consume the most food in the shortest time. Pan was not the only one facing these risks. Other mukbang influencers like Nikocado Avocado had also made headlines for their extreme eating habits and deteriorating health. Doctors and psychologists stepped in, warning about the dangers of binge eating for entertainment, including obesity, digestive disorders, and even life-threatening conditions like gastric rupture. Despite China's 2021 anti-food waste law, which banned extreme mukbang content, Pan had found ways to bypass the rules and continue streaming, driven by fame and financial success. But was it worth it? Her story raised serious ethical questions about social media culture. Should platforms regulate extreme content more strictly? Should influencers be held accountable for promoting harmful behaviors? And most importantly, how far should people go for online fame? Pan's tragic death is a harsh reality check on the pressures influencers face. The internet rewards bigger, crazier, more extreme content, pushing creators to risk their health for views, likes, and money. If Pan had listened to her family, if mukbang hadn't become such a viral sensation, would things have been different? Maybe, maybe not. But one thing is clear, her story is a sobering reminder of what happens when entertainment crosses the line into self-destruction. For those who enjoy mukbang, it's worth remembering that behind the screen, behind the food, there's a real person. And sometimes, the cost of content creation is far too high. It's far too high. On a humid summer morning, August 27, 2012, the Lower East Side of Manhattan buzzed with its usual energy, street vendors calling out, cars honking, and life moving at its relentless pace. But within the unassuming walls of 191 Orchard Street, a chilling scene was about to unfold. A 29-year-old woman named Carlisle Brigham, raised in privilege and charm, was discovered in a stairwell, her body lifeless and surrounded by blood. What had happened to her, and why? Carlisle Brigham was not the kind of person you'd expect to meet such an end. The daughter of James R. Brigham Jr., a former New York City budget director, she had grown up with every advantage. Private schools, a degree from the University of Mary Washington, and a job at the prestigious American Museum of Natural History. Her life seemed golden, yet behind the scenes, shadows loomed. Just a year earlier, Carlisle had married Anthony Champalimaud, a hotel executive, in a wedding that was the talk of Newport, Rhode Island. But the fairy tale had quickly unraveled. Within months, their relationship fractured, and they separated. The toll was heavy on Carlisle, and she spiraled into bouts of heavy drinking, her once vibrant life beginning to blur at the edges. Her father, deeply concerned, had flown in from St. Louis. He planned to take her to rehab, a last-ditch effort to help his daughter reclaim her life. But fate intervened in the most brutal way. The night before her death, Carlisle attended a wedding in Washington, D.C., returning to New York in the early hours with friends. They spent the night drinking heavily at a bar called the Sixth Ward. Carlisle so intoxicated she had to be carried at times. She ended up at the apartment of a platonic friend. She'd lost her own keys. Her friend left for work the next morning, leaving her alone, her demons closing in. Around 11 a.m., 19-year-old Mizanur Rahman, a neighbor, stumbled upon a harrowing sight. Carlisle lay sprawled in the stairwell, her body eerily still, her face pressed against the cold marble steps. Blood pooled around her head, her neck bearing a massive wound, and her chin shattered. Beside her were her belongings, a large handbag and a wallet. Mizanur tried desperately to save her, performing CPR despite the horror before him, but it was too late. Emergency responders rushed her to Beth Israel Medical Center. Doctors worked frantically, but the injuries were too severe. Carlisle Brigham was pronounced dead. The scene haunted everyone who encountered it. Investigators grappled with the brutal reality of her injuries. Blunt trauma to her head and neck, fractures to her arms, likely from trying to break her fall. Was it a tragic accident or was something more sinister at play? Initially, the severity of her wounds raised suspicions of foul play. A violent attack? A desperate suicide? But as detectives pieced together the evidence, a narrative of devastating misfortune began to take shape. Carlisle had been wearing high heels and loose clothing. The steep, unforgiving marble stairs of the building became the silent accomplice in her demise. She had slipped, fallen, and struck her head in a fatal sequence of events. For her father, James, the news was a crushing blow. He had come to New York to save his daughter, only to lose her before he could even try. Former Mayor Ed Koch, a longtime friend of James, recalled the sorrow in his voice as he broke down over the phone. The medical examiner ruled Carlisle's death an accident, a verdict that did little to comfort those who loved her. Her estranged husband, Anthony, was in London on business when he heard the news. Despite their separation, the two had been working toward reconciliation. Those hopes were now shattered. Like the pieces of Carlisle's life, Carlisle Brigham was remembered as a beautiful, kind-hearted soul, someone who could light up a room with her presence. But her story remains a haunting reminder of how quickly life can change. A single moment, a single misstep, turning promise into tragedy. In the stairwell where her life ended, the echoes of that fateful fall still seem to linger, a silent testament to the fragility of even the brightest lives. It was November 3rd, 2014, in Jersey City, New Jersey. A brisk, ordinary morning as the city buzzed with its usual rhythm. Gary Anderson, a 58-year-old delivery man from Summerdale, set off to work, unaware that this day would end in unspeakable tragedy. His destination was a high-rise construction site on Christopher Columbus Drive, where two towering 50-story residential buildings and a hotel were being built. For Gary, it was just another day on the job, but fate had other plans. Gary was known for his reliability and strong work ethic. His truck, boldly marked with the phrase, "Owned by God," reflected the deep faith that guided his life. He was well liked by colleagues and cherished by his family, his wife and daughters, who were his world. But on this day, a small, seemingly insignificant mistake would set off a chain of events leading to devastating consequences. By 9 a.m., the construction site was alive with activity, workers shouting over the hum of machinery. Gary parked his truck near the site, preparing to deliver drywall. His hard hat, a critical piece of safety gear, sat forgotten in his car. Nearby, on the 50th floor, high above the bustling chaos below, a construction worker adjusted his tool belt. Among the tools was a simple, 1-pound tape measure, dangling precariously. Then, it happened. The tape measure slipped free. It began its descent from the 50th floor, accelerating rapidly. Nearly 500 feet below, Gary was leaning into the window of a pickup truck, chatting casually with a colleague. He had no idea that death was hurtling toward him at over 140 miles per hour. The tape measure, now a lethal projectile, struck a piece of construction equipment about 15 feet above the ground. The deflection altered its path, but not its deadly speed. It ricocheted downward and straight into Gary's head. The impact was catastrophic. Gary collapsed instantly, unconscious before his body hit the ground. Chaos erupted. Workers rushed to his side, their shouts mingling with the wail of approaching sirens. An ambulance arrived swiftly, and Gary was rushed to Jersey City Medical Center, but the damage was too severe. Despite the efforts of emergency staff, Gary went into cardiac arrest and was pronounced dead at 9:52 a.m. His wife and daughters, who had rushed to the hospital, were met with the unimaginable news. Gary, their rock, their protector, was gone. The construction site fell silent in the wake of the tragedy. Gary's colleague, who had been speaking with him moments before the accident, was in shock. "It's terrifying," he muttered. "I had no idea something so small could do so much damage." Nearby, workers echoed the sentiment, their faces pale with the stark realization that a single oversight could claim a life in an instant. Safety discussions quickly followed. "You don't work in this environment without a hard hat," a former construction worker remarked. Yet, even with a hard hat, experts later noted, Gary's chances of survival were slim against the sheer speed and force of the falling object. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, launched an investigation, scrutinizing the site's safety protocols. How had a simple tool fallen? Could this have been prevented? The site was temporarily shut down, but for Gary's family, no investigation could bring back the man they loved. Gary's colleagues remembered him as a devout, hardworking man. Just before the accident, he had been telling a story and uttered the words, "God is good." Now, those words carried an eerie resonance, a reminder of how fragile life is. This tragedy was a chilling testament to the unpredictability of life and the grave dangers that can lurk in even the most routine tasks. For Gary's family, the loss was not just a headline, but an unbearable void. And for the construction workers left behind, his death served as a somber warning. Even the smallest mistakes can carry the weight of tragedy. October 5th, 2020. started like any other morning in Jixi City, northeastern China. A family of 12 gathered for breakfast, ready to dig into a local favorite, Swan Tang Zi, a traditional noodle dish made from fermented corn flour. But what they didn't know was that their meal had been harboring a deadly secret for the past year. These homemade noodles had been sitting in their freezer for 12 months, waiting for their moment. And, unfortunately, that moment came. As the noodles were defrosted and reheated, something seemed off. The 3 youngest family members took one bite, noticed a strange taste, and wisely decided to skip breakfast. But the other 9, they powered through, unaware that this simple decision would seal their fate. Within hours, chaos broke loose. Nausea, vomiting, crippling stomach pain, and overwhelming weakness hit them hard. All 9 were rushed to the hospital, but despite the best medical efforts, 7 had died by October 10th. Just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, 2 more, including a 47-year-old woman named Lee, passed away by October 12th. In just 1 week, the entire group who ate the noodles was gone. Doctors were baffled. What could have possibly wiped out an entire family so quickly? The answer came when tests revealed the culprit, bonchrecic acid, a lethal toxin produced by the bacterium Burkholderia gladioli. This nasty poison thrives in fermented foods like corn flour noodles, and to make matters worse, it's tasteless, odorless, and heat-resistant. That means reheating the noodles did absolutely nothing to destroy the toxin. The fermentation process had gone wrong during the year the noodles were frozen, creating a breeding ground for this deadly bacteria. Once ingested, bonchrecic acid went straight for the liver, kidneys, heart, and brain, causing rapid organ failure. Without immediate intervention, which in this case didn't exist, death was almost inevitable. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the community. Health authorities launched an urgent public warning, telling people to be extra cautious with fermented foods. They advised against using moldy, soaked, or improperly stored grains, emphasizing that freezing alone doesn't kill dangerous bacteria. It just pauses their growth until they're thawed and ready to strike again. The younger family members' decision to trust their instincts and avoid the odd-tasting meal had saved their lives, serving as a chilling reminder that sometimes your taste buds know best. This heartbreaking incident underscored a critical lesson. Food safety is not something to take lightly. While people know about food poisoning, bonchrecic acid is far less known, but no less dangerous. In response, Chinese health officials ramped up awareness efforts, urging people to follow strict guidelines when fermenting foods at home. The government issued public safety advisories, emphasizing the importance of hygiene, proper storage, and knowing when to just throw food away. What started as an ordinary breakfast turned into a devastating reminder that food preparation isn't just about taste. It can mean the difference between life and death.